This computer. All right, so did it tell you it's recording?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, I am Sam Hirt, biology professor at Southern Virginia University, and it's actually been I've always wanted to do a podcast. I actually tried to start one with a friend of mine a few years ago, and we were both just too busy. We were actually recorded one episode, but didn't ever do anything with it. So anyway, my thoughts for this podcast are to have conversations about climate change. Just regular people, wherever they're at, wherever they interact with this topic. And then hopefully in the course of these conversations, we learn some things. We actually probably have some questions that are unanswered. And those are some things I'd like to kind of dive into deeper as kind of a follow-up to the conversations we have. And yeah, this is a topic I think is really important. It's one that I've interacted with a lot as a biology professor, and seeing how it affects living things and the environment, and of course humans as well. But yeah, so that's me. You want to introduce yourself?
Well, I'm Dr. Sam Hirt's older brother. My name's Jon Hirt. My profession has been in the private sector, more particularly around renewable energies. And my approach, I think, to climate change has been different than Sam's, but I think that first and foremost, we're brothers, and so we have a appreciation for each other's positions, but yet share a common background. So I think that's kind of interesting that we both, we grew up in the same home, the same town, and have landed. I don't know if we've landed that differently, but we definitely have a broad opinion on this topic together, I would say. So
yeah, and I would say this isn't, as kind of background, this isn't our first conversation about climate change. I've actually really enjoyed the opportunities to talk with this on a number of different levels, a number of different times. And what's funny is sometimes it's just like, or at least in my perspective, it'll start just like with a question here or there, and then the next thing you know, we're talking or chatting or we're texting back and forth for a couple hours, anyway, I've really enjoyed just the ongoing kind of continuing conversation and things we learn from each other. I'm always surprised at, because I know generally kind of things about like solar power and the ideas about it. And so sometimes when I've shared some of those ideas, it's really good to hear your perspective, because you have a more much more detailed and specific experience with things like solar, and having worked in that industry in a number of different ways, a number of different companies. So anyway, I always learn something. You have a really good grasp on some of the like finer details, how it works in this grid in California and your company and things like that. So anyway, a good place to start, I think is probably the first question that we kind of sketched out. How do you see your life interacting with climate change?
and that question's to me, or you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, you start. I've kind of talked a little bit.
So maybe it's probably good to give kind of some maybe background of my position a little bit before we get into the question. And that has been that my experience with regulation or government involvement has always been negative, until it's in the rearview mirror. So smog controls on automobiles were introduced in the 70s and 80s, and it had a major impact on the performance of vehicles. I've never been a big fan of smog. And I grew up in a remote place. Sam and I grew up in Alaska, and the smog was not a thing. We came from a small town to most people's standards, and there just wasn't enough pollution there to really kick up smog. But after college, I moved to LA, and so now I live in maybe one of the more air pollution places on the planet. And so now looking back, I have an appreciation that I'm not choking on the air every day when I get up, and for that regulation that was put in place, because no one was really going to do that on their own, right? No one's going to run out and buy smog equipment and put it on their car. And the automobile industry and factories and anyone that's belching bad air was regulated. So I see that as a good thing, again, in the rearview mirror. But here we are again, maybe standing at a point in time, and anytime the government gets involved, I don't think they do things very efficiently, and therefore I have a lack of trust for what they're doing and what their initiatives do. So getting back to the question, how is my life impacted? Well, most of my life, I would say, is impacted through regulation. Because of where I live and maybe the culture I'm brought up in, I don't see a lot of the impacts of my choices on pollution, right? So Amazon drops stuff off at my door all day long that has probably negative impacts to the environment. And those impacts are overseas, they're along the highway where the Amazon truck drove, not necessarily in my face or in my backyard, so to speak. So my personal view to answer that question is really, what kind of controls is the government putting on me? And that's usually my experience. Now, I don't want to be a big polluter. I don't want to be contributing to pollution, but I also don't want my life constrained. So, if I have the option to take a Sunday drive in a gas powered vehicle and belch some carbon out into the atmosphere to go on a scenic drive, I'll probably go on that scenic drive. Like if I'm weighing the aspects, as ironic or I don't know the right word. Yeah, that might be. So yeah, and like I try and make sure my aluminum cans go in the recycling bin, right? And but I'm not for the recent regulation in California that we have to compost our uneaten food. That just seems like a bunch of nonsense to me. But 20 years from now, I may look back and say, hey, that was a really good idea, California. Everybody should have done that sooner. But so.
Yeah, no, a couple of things, and this has kind of come up through the course of our conversations, and as I've reflected on some of the things we've said. My interaction with climate change has largely been academic, and certainly there's personal things that I've thought about and done and changed in my life due to what I've learned about climate change. But yeah, largely this has come through like my job. I teach biology. A big part of and largely my research has been done with in ecology, which is looking at the interaction of living things in their environment. Well, according to the scientific body of literature, which I've I've read in some of these things, the climate is changing, and therefore the interaction with plants and animals with the environment is also changing, and um, and that's causing, a lot of different um, things to basically negatively affect living things, not just on the things that I study, but it seems to be pretty general throughout the world. Um, and so uh, I have a lot less experience on the policy side of I'm not a political scientist. I'm a biologist, and so understanding what policy is going to be the best, and what policy is going to move the needle towards, like you said, hopefully in the future we look back and say, oh yeah, that was great, that worked well, even perhaps if certain groups of people didn't love it. Um, uh, how we implement these things and make these things effective um, is not something I'm an expert at. But so finally getting to my point, um, as I was thinking about this, it would be nice if policy that does come out and is effective across the board, kind of whether you care about climate change or not. I would think that a policy needs to be effective in its means. Um, and so sometimes that looks like financial incentives. Um, and I think that's kind of what you've had experience with living in California. You actually have quite a bit of electrical and solar and um, these modern technologies, which are green energy. I say that in quotes because there's a lot of variables in there that isn't necessarily discussed when people say green energy. Um, but yeah, like it's not that you have invested a lot of time and research into climate change and the environment and all these other things, but because it's set up in a certain way, it allows you to still contribute to the solution, but in a way that doesn't have to be thoughtful. I don't know if that's phrasing it the right way, um, but these other so one of the things we talked about was the state of California implementing a ban on gas vehicles, or phasing out gas vehicles by, was it 2030
Mm-hmm.
is the time by which that will happen. That doesn't seem to be like a subtle or a workaround where they're like financially creating incentives or the carrot, I guess, that they're dangling in front of. That seems like something that was really obviously, all right, we're gonna set a timeline, we're gonna set a hard line in the sand, and now everybody else has to catch up, right? And so yeah, and so your response to that was, I sent it to you, and I think I said, "Isn't this great?" And your response was, "I don't think so," right?
No, yeah. So maybe we can kind of revisit that conversation a little bit. You were excited about that regulation coming out, and I wasn't, right? Because that uh, you were excited, and I don't want to speak for you necessarily, but you were excited to see that there was a mass implementation of something that you thought would be good for the environment. Whereas I'm looking at it from what's the impact that it's going to have on me, and the financial blow that it might be, and the other difficulties that incorporate that, and my skepticism that an electric vehicle is really better for the environment um, than a gas powered vehicle. Now, I think that depending on what studies you read or whatever, you'll find you'll actually find.
Sorry, that was security. All right.
All right. Uh, and depending on what studies you read, I think you'll find that there are people that advocate that, electric vehicles aren't any better for the environment than gas-powered vehicles or combustion engine vehicles. Um, I don't know where I sit on that really. I think I would need to dive into the research, which I'm not particularly interested in doing,
Mhm.
just but with my other workloads. But um, what I find is interesting is I seem to have the life that you kind of want, maybe, or some of the things in my life that you would rather participate in, and you have some of the things that maybe I would want, right? And just based on where we live. So I do have solar, I do have a battery, I have two EVs, and that none of that is due to my desire to be green. Well, not green as in environmentally green, right? Like I have all of that because it's a financial advantage for me. And so if if there are programs out there, and I think that the programs have been good in California for getting people to do solar and to get to adopt that, but as they've worked, they've also implemented new programs and new regulation that has been a hindrance to solar. So the legislators and those that are in charge of, say, the PUC, they give you a carrot and then they yank the rug out from underneath you. So like recently, um, NEM or net metering was reorganized from it's been reorganized now twice. There was an NEM1, which was a 1-for-1 credit, and then a NEM2, which was time of use credits. And now recently they've yanked that and changed it to NEM3. And part of the negotiation of that was that the money that I've invested in solar is now only secure for 15 years. So I'm grandfathered in, not for the life of my system, but for 15 years. And after 15 years, then basically any advantage that I have for that disappears. So I think more specifically about the electric vehicle discussion that we had was that I didn't feel like it was proper for the government to demand that I buy a certain kind of vehicle by eliminating my choices. I feel like the incentive should be there for me to do that, and that the market more or less should dictate what I buy. Now, does that allow someone to buy some big, you know, black belching thing just because they want to? I don't think that that's necessarily right either. Um, but what I didn't like about the position that you were taking was that here I am in a state that's forcing me to do things while people in other states that aren't under that same force are applauding that force, yet don't make those same corrections in their own life. I would say that the believers are not the buyers. And so someone, and there's various reasons. I'm not trying to, implicate anybody, but if you feel that strongly about something that you're going to celebrate my hands being tied, then I would hope that you've purchased or made those same obligations in your personal life because of your convictions. So
Yeah, no, and that's a fair point. And I think you brought up kind of the differences of where we live. I currently live in Virginia, where we don't. And I've looked into solar for my house, and our net metering. I'm not sure what it's called, but it does not allow you to essentially create excess and sell it back to the grid. And so it doesn't make financial sense to 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 get tons of solar on your rooftop so that all of your energy all of the time is covered by solar. In order to do that, I'd actually have to produce a lot more energy than I need because of the winter months and the cloudy days and everything else. Um, and so it would be a cost to me. And my reason for not doing it is kind of the same reason for you doing it. It doesn't make financial sense. I mean, I could make the sacrifices in my life to do that, but I haven't. And part of the reason is kind of um, going back to my original thought is that if I made those personal choices, and this is kind of, I guess, the multiple um, the multiple thing we're experiencing in these two different areas. Even if I did make that choice, it wouldn't. It would require a lot of people to make financial sacrifices to do it in order to make a difference, right? So everyone would have to collectively say, "Hey, let's pay more for electricity and change our grid individually, and then it'll all change and make a difference." But when I'm
That's
looking around, I I don't see other people with that same attitude, right? And so I would be taking a financial risk while not really solving the problem. And so I applaud, part of me applauding this in California is I would actually like that in where I live. I would like a Virginia to adopt some of the things that California has and maybe adopt them in a better way. California is leading the way in um, a lot of these initiatives, and a lot of people are looking at California to see how it works and how it doesn't work. Um, and hopefully an adoption by the time it gets to Virginia is something better, more efficient, more equitable, and all of those things. But if you lived in Virginia, right, would you have solar or electric cars or
absolutely not.
right?
So the what I think, and you can read different studies that say uh, differently, but I think I haven't found a study that says this, but I think that the adoption of solar in California has a major contribution to the rise of costs. Solar is more expensive than fossil fuel or whatever. We don't have a lot of renewables here, meaning wind or hydropower in California. So the fact that solar costs more, that was regulated into the utilities by a green initiative standard. So the government told the utilities that by a certain date, you have to have so much of your energy production portfolio has to come from renewable sources. That created a big market for solar. They went out and bought more solar. Well, now their blend of energy, because they had to do 20%, and I think now 30%, that energy became more expensive. Part of the blend of that now is passed on to us as the rate payers. So my rates have come up. There's been other things such as the wildfires, which that just got passed on to the rate payers. The utilities out here are allowed to always make money, and so there really is it's a monopoly, and there's no real hard responsibility to do better. There's no competition, and so it just gets passed on to the ratepayer. So I don't know what you pay in Virginia, but I guess you're somewhere between 9 and 12 cents a kilowatt hour. Do you know, Sam?
No, I don't know.
I would guess I spend 50 cents a kilowatt hour during the day and 83 cents a kilowatt hour between the hours of 4 and 9 p.m. So my energy here is super expensive, which again incentivized me back to solar, because it's a fixed payment one time, and then I've pre-bought all my energy for the next number of years.
But
So
if I understand it correctly, it also messes up anyone that doesn't have renewable energy when
right.
you create all these incentives for people who can afford it to kind of escape the grid. but that just makes it more expensive for everyone else who's stuck in the
Right.
grid.
So again, the utility is always able to pass it on to their ratepayers. If I'm no longer a ratepayer because I took advantage of the solar program, now there's just less people in the pool to charge, and so that's driven rates up too, I would imagine. I don't have a study to back that up. So that was part of the net metering 2 versus net metering 3 in California, as the utilities went to bat for the less fortunate or under low income providers and said, hey, it's not fair. I don't think that's their job. Their job is just to provide energy for us, but they went back to the PUC and used the, it's not fair that rich people don't have to pay for their energy and all the poor people do, and so it's unequitable, and so we need to change the rules now. And they've really de-incentivized. I mean, solar will take a big dip now in 2023 and 2024. It'll change the way that it's applied to residential, commercial applications. See a lot more batteries because of the same problem that you're having in Virginia, where your overproduction is not valued, and it's not regulated that they value that. And so the only way to do that is to save your energy by having a battery. So you store your overproduction into a battery and then use it later on. Yeah, so that is a little problematic.
So, I mean, this sounds like a bureaucratic system where the government is being heavily influenced and being involved in what is not a free market in the first place, right? It's not like I can pick and choose where my energy is coming from. I mean, to some extent, right? You can get solar. I guess you could buy a small windmill, but the grid itself is kind of we're noticing is the source of the problem, or I should say the utility companies, because they're allowed to always make money. And I think the original incentive was we want them to make money so that they will continue to provide power for us, right? As long as there's money in there, they'll do it. But it seems like this is headed towards a government takeover of utilities. Like,
could be, yeah.
Or maybe even the opposite end. Maybe everything needs to be privatized, so that competition can exist, and maybe that can help. You can get a variety of different ways to get electricity, and then that will allow you to bring down. I don't know how either one of those would work very well, but
yeah, I'm not well studied on it, but there was a deregulation of the utilities at some point in our life, past few decades. I want to say the late 80s, early 90s. And that's what created within California really the three big utilities: PG&E, SDG&E, and SCE. And so I think that was their attempt at kind of privatizing, because you really can't have, everybody's house has, seven circuits hooked up to it, and you get to pick whoever's got the best price. It's not like T-Mobile and AT&T and the deregulation of the phone companies. So it just presents its own challenges. But kind of going back a little bit, the demand or the regulation to only allow electric cars to be sold in California in 2030 doesn't take into account the effect that is going to have on our underserved and already struggling grid. So that's going to require Californians to need more electricity at certain times. We're big commuters. We don't have a lot of public transportation that's I don't think public transportation isn't used because we don't want it to. It's just the nature of where we live. Our cities aren't built with like a New York where everybody goes downtown and works and leaves. It's just like a big mess. Everybody goes a different direction for work. And so So public transportation is hard if you, you know, work in it, or, you know, live in Irvine and work in, you know, Norco. There isn't public transportation that goes that direction, right? And not everybody works, not very many people work in downtown LA. So that's problematic in that the utilities, the grid is not ready for this kind of demand, um, demand and energy production on it. So distributing it and transmission, it's all underserved for what they're trying to do. And then that only really addresses cars. You know, the trucking industry is the big. We got a port here, right? Like Long Beach is a huge port, and so a lot of trucking comes in and out of there. There is a company, I'm forgetting the name of it, that is trying to battery semis, but there's huge limitations on what that can do. They've built a big charging plant and station outside of Bakersfield. I think there's one they're working on out within Long Beach or somewhere in that area. And then there was another one like in San Bernardino or something like that. But they were all short hauls, so meaning that it's not going to go across the country, and the trucks are really heavy. That's going to have wear out roads more. Like there's all these negative, or I shouldn't say negative, there's just these unintended consequences that come from these types of demands. And it's complicated. It's not as easy as saying, hey, just switch to electric cars, we're good.
Right. And you know, and honestly, when you look into electric cars, it's not like there's no environmental cost to making an electric car, right? It's still a huge hunk of, you know, steel, plastic, computer parts, and that battery itself is filled with rare metals and things that have to be mined all over the world. So it seems to get a lot of attention, perhaps even more attention than it deserves, because it'll reduce carbon emissions, I guess. And studies have shown over the life of the vehicle, it appears to have a lesser impact, but it's still an impact. And, you know, if everybody converts to electric cars, we somehow have the ability to do that tomorrow, there's still a lot of room to make up the difference. And in fact, you know, reducing, a motorbike is probably a much better for the environment than an electric car, right? If we all just drove gas-powered motorbikes, we'd actually probably make up more of a difference than driving electrical SUVs or whatever it is. But it's and we've talked about this too. Media and public figures and you know, kind of our general public misunderstanding of the issue leads to these things as if they're going to be you know, our saviors, and this is all, if we can just do this, then we're gonna be there, we're gonna solve climate change. And that's just not the case. The problem is so much bigger than just one piece of transportation. And maybe part of that is just because transportation is such a big part of our lives, and it's something that, as Americans at least, we do a lot of. So maybe that's something we could tackle first, and other things will work in next. I don't know, but it's not a silver bullet. It's not gonna fix climate change. It's just one piece of a big puzzle.
Yeah, I think also I wanted to touch a little bit when you were talking about your experience of being in Virginia and wanting to, you know, hey, I don't want to do this alone. I want the government to, force or encourage my neighbors and community to have to do the same thing. And because it put you at a financial disadvantage, right? if we're considering winning the race financially and paying our bills, and you choose to adopt something because you believe in it, and your neighbor doesn't, you're at a disadvantage. You know, maybe your kids go without new shoes, or maybe they go without lunch or whatever. You know, that being dramatic there, but
Right.
you're at a disadvantage because of those choices. That's just on kind of our micro or our home unit scale. I believe that happens on a national scale. I believe that the more we force ourselves to take on these technologies that are green and expensive, it it puts us at a disadvantage with other um, producing countries. So China's not changing their behavior. India's not changing their behavior. And so we actually are just pushing jobs and production and things to them and giving them an advantage over what we currently have now. We're basically pushing industry to them and also pushing the pollution over there. So I'm not sure it really addresses it. Just because we do, if we solved all of our problems here at home in the U.S., I think it would create a lot of additional pollution elsewhere, and so we would just be financially less advantageous.
Yeah, it's a great point that really are if our individual successes, whether that's as a country, as a person, or whatever, comes at a cost at a different part of the world, um, then what's the point? Like, this is a global issue. It's not a U.S. issue or a North America issue. It's a global issue, and so it needs global initiative, which is we don't have a global government, right? We don't have anything
The
close
UN
to
isn't global?
that. I mean, it's global, but it's not a government.
I'm just kidding.
um, and so yeah, if America is going to lead the way, I think there is a great argument for that. Like, if we can do it, then other countries can do it and would hopefully follow suit. And with we have the largest economy per capita. I think China's economy is technically a little bit larger, um, but yeah, if our economy can do it, then other economies can do it. It's kind of like the space race. If we made it to the moon, what was really the point of going to the moon? I don't know, but everyone got involved. All these other um, countries are also trying to get to the moon, get to space, and do it. And a lot of technology came out of that that we use, on a daily basis. GPS, Tang, uh,
Did the Ting come out of that?
yeah, Tang was
Oh
a
man, that's a good.
invention.
That's well worth it if it was just Tang.
I don't
You
think
and
I've
I
had
both know
Tang
that
in 10, 15 years. I don't
since
even
we had
know.
to drink sulfur water, that covers that up really good.
Yeah, but anyway, like, um, but yeah, I mean, I think there is an argument that if California can do it, then Virginia can do it. If the U.S. can do it, then China can do it.
But
But
what if, but what if,
yeah,
but what if California does all this and it doesn't yield results? That's where that's kind of the camp I'm at is maybe, but they sell it as a zero emissions vehicle. Well, that's bullcrap, right?
right,
There's no
no
such
such
thing
thing.
unless I'm charging it during the day on solar or some other renewable energy. It's most of them we're incentivized to charge our cars at night. There is no solar at night, so that energy is directly associated with fossil fuels generally, unless I live next to a dam. Um,
Yeah,
so so the I think that's my some of my frustrations with this is I don't think it is working. It's driving up. I think it's a contributor to driving up the cost of energy. Um, it's it's expensive, and I don't know if it's solving any of California's energy problems, you know? And uh, so I'm just skeptical of that. And again, I'm not well researched. I work in an industry that people love, and that's great. I love that people love what I do. Helps me put food on the table. Um, but I see all the back end stuff and the complications and the sacrifices that are made to for the image, you know. And at the end of the day, it's just an industry, it's just our widget, and it's not necessarily, any better than anything else. So
Right. And yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Is one of the questions you raised, like, well, what if we do all this and it doesn't work? Um, and and for a lot of reasons, you see why it isn't working. And definitely, I think it needs to be changed. It needs to be tweaked, or it needs to be scrapped and start over. Whatever it is,
but
it's not
what if we just put tighter regulation on our emissions? What if we just came up with something, that's
like,
always been tighter and tighter and tighter. Like, you look at what a carpet, belches now compared to what it did 30, 40, 50 years ago. I'd imagine that those are pretty significantly different.
yeah. Well, I mean, there is the idea of a carbon tax, and that would solve all our problems if there was a payment associated with how much carbon dioxide you emitted.
But then again, the rich people do whatever they want,
Right?
and
But at least you would be able to gather some revenue from them doing whatever they want
and
and,
and
and
then
apply
and then
that.
who manages that revenue, right? We're back to the government and their wasteful spending. Like, it would definitely motivate people to um, change their behaviors. I don't like whose pockets that fills.
Yeah. There's a nationwide organization called Citizen Climate Lobby. I actually kind of dabbled in, went to a couple of meetings. One of the things they were pushing at least a few years ago when I was looking into it was this carbon tax with a rebate for the poor people, essentially. Like, if you couldn't afford to pay the carbon tax, then you would have some way of recouping some of that tax back to the, but it would be set at a rate where there was an ability to create a fund that would help solve climate change. Now, it's a conceptual idea that economists would say, like, this will work, but nobody wants to have more taxes. Nobody wants.
No,
It's very unpopular to pay more for gas, no matter who you are. I as environmental as I am, I still don't want $5, $5 per gallon gas. And it would be very hard to convince a whole state, city, whatever municipality, to vote for something like that. And in the areas where it's been tried, I think it was tried in Oregon and perhaps in Washington, one of those Northwest states. Uh, it's failed. It was highly unpopular. People didn't like it.
I think that's the one of the problems that I see. If I could say I'm sitting on the sidelines, is that people talk a lot more than they act. And, I don't like to think that of people. I want to think that everyone is well intended. But when you ask people to put their money where their mouth is, the money doesn't often follow. And so I would say two things. I, I would love to see people that preach the preach spend the money to do that on their own initiative without government programs. And two, I forgot. I know I had a really good second point, but it'll come to me in a little bit. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, who are the people? This is a open-ended question. Who are the people that can afford to do something? And the answer to that is actually everybody can do something, right?
yeah, well, if
But
it's and I'll use a
people
bad
can afford
word.
to do more.
if it's as existential as our politicians say it is, then everybody should be doing everything. We should all be scrambling. I know my second point now. My second point was that one of the problems, I think, is that the believers or the government or whoever, the Democrats or whoever you want to put in that camp, do a poor job of convincing the majority of the population that this is a real problem and that these are real solutions. I think there's I don't want to say climate change should be a marketing thing, but I think that pollution is poorly marketed. Impacts are not well understood or known, and solutions are forced, poorly adopted. And I think if it was presented in a better way, I fall in that camp. Like, I'm skeptical, right? And so if it was presented in a better way, I could get on board. I might give up a thing or two, but
Yeah.
but I don't make choices in my lifestyle around what the impacts are going to be.
Yeah, I have 2 points, and I'll probably forget the second one before I get to it as well. But the first one is that yes, there is a public perception problem, especially with climate change. And part of that may not be politicians. Well, maybe it is that some politicians are adopting the science behind climate change as a platform, and therefore the issue is politicized. And so when politicians pick it up, it becomes murky, right? And it becomes really hard. So if this is being used as a political pawn to gain power by a political party, then it's lost its effectiveness. Yeah, we generally have a poor perception of politicians. Scientists themselves also, I mean, I'm not the one doing climate change science, so I shouldn't lump myself with these scientists. But scientists generally, they communicate in a pretty rigid and not transferable in its communication, right? Published research papers are not easy for anyone to pick up and just start reading, right? You can't just give 10 climate science papers to, all right, these are going to go out in the newspaper, and people are going to be like, oh yeah, we need to change. So scientists aren't necessarily the best communicators of this information. And so you do miss, like, what is the real truth of it all, if all I can really see is what media pushes out there, and media's ability to push out science is, well, it's got to be flashy, and it's got to grab people's attention. And then the politicians are doing it for the political purposes. And so it's really hard to get where is the real issue, where is the real urgency, or whatever it is with the issue. So, and that's a general criticism of scientists. They aren't very good at communicating the science to the public. Second, I did remember a second. So the second point is, in the politicization of this issue, there are politicians that, because of financial interest, special interest, whatever it is, have pushed back not against finding the solutions, but in the science itself, to sow doubt and miscommunication, mistrust, whatever, into the science, is to protect their interests, whether that's in big oil or whatever part of the current fossil fuel economy that they are using for their political power. It's now threatened by this science. All right, so all of that really confuses the issue, and largely that's actually, I guess, part of the reason why I want to start this podcast. I want to be able to discuss the topics in a non-political way, although politics is always part of the conversation. Um, and hopefully get more into the science. I know we haven't really talked much about the science itself of climate change, but we have talked, I think, about where it can possibly, touch in the different parts of our lives. So.
Yeah, I think just kind of getting onto the politicization and some of my skepticisms is, recent legislation, one, the net metering change that was approved by Gavin Newsom, and then President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. Both of those had components of prevailing wage or union requirements in them to reach certain incentives, or just demands altogether. And so when I see stuff like that, that does not drive down pricing. That raises pricing across the board. I don't think that offers fair competition. And so I see that as insincere. Like, hey, we believe in this agenda, we're going to move it forward, but oh yeah, we're going to put in little grabs and drivers in here that are going to raise the cost of solar. And if you really believed in that, I feel like you would do whatever you could do to reduce costs. You want that to be less expensive, more adopted. You want more and more and more of that, not less and less. And so the NEM 2 to NEM 3 will drive less solar into California. It will slow that down. So I see that as disingenuous, as well as the requirements around prevailing wage.
Yeah. Well, I think Inflation Reduction Act is a great example. I haven't read what's in the act. I have heard that there was a lot of climate legislation in there. It's been touted as like the most or the biggest legislative attempt to tackle some of the problems of climate change that has ever been passed. And so some of those led to pats on the back here and there about what happened. But yeah, the political process is fraught with concessions. Like this was passed by Democrats. So in this huge act, things that are politically in favor of the Democratic Party also are hitching a ride with, it's called the Inflation Reduction Act. It wasn't called the Climate Change Act or anything of that.
And does it affect inflation?
Right.
I haven't seen my inflation go down at all. Milk's not getting cheaper.
Yeah,
Gas isn't getting cheaper.
I think the inflation reduction part was actually a smaller chunk anyway. So yeah, the political process is hard. I don't know how else to say. It's not perfect yet. Kind of going back to where we were at before, like I want to see this not as a politicized issue, but as a opportunity for both political parties to use whatever philosophies or ideologies are inherent in their politics to solve the problem. But unfortunately, it's not. It's largely been championed by Democrats and refuted by Republicans. And there's a lot of gray area in between. I don't want to say all Republicans want to destroy the earth and all Democrats are angels, environmental angels or anything. But it seems that the current state of politics on this issue is that you're not getting bipartisan support. And so how are we supposed to really have political solutions that only one party is behind? Yeah.
Well, I don't think that just one party is behind it. I think that one party is promoting it. I don't think that you're getting necessarily obstruction from the Republican Party, but you're not, the Inflation Reduction Act is probably a good example. It's got so much pork in it for the Democrats that it's not the climate stuff that the Republicans might be against. It's everything else that's tied with it. And so
Yeah.
then they're painted with a broad brush as, oh, well, you're not for the environment. And it isn't the number one issue for Republicans.
Yeah.
I think they're focused on other issues that they feel are more important for how the country operates, not necessarily, what we're doing with the climate. And so, to be fair, I think you really have to break people down by individuals and look at, what they're willing to support and not support and why. I really don't think there's anybody on the planet that, just wants to pollute for no reason. But, I mean, that I would hope that most people have that in their heart that, hey, I don't want to pollute. But, you could look at me and say, well, your leisure activities put a lot of carbon in there, whatever, whether that's, driving cars or riding motorcycles or boats or, trips, vacations, at some point, everything we do has a footprint, right? The number of, we've talked about this, the number of shoes in my closet has it has a footprint, right? So if I have 2 pairs of shoes, I have far less of a footprint on the environment than if I have 40. But how many shoes do I have in my closet? I don't know. I don't count them. And so it's more than 2. And we live in a world where we have different things for different purposes. And I don't want to be telling people how many shoes they can own or what vacations they can or can't take because of the carbon footprint it leaves, or whether you can have motorcycles in your garage, and use them on a regular basis, or how often you can use a recreational vehicle, or what you mow your lawn with. Does it have to be gas powered or electric powered? I don't want the government getting into those decisions. But again, 20 years down the road, I might be, boy, I'm glad nobody was allowed to ride recreational vehicles or whatever, So it's a really delicate process, and I think a slippery slope when you get into regulation. You're really, I mean, look at big vehicles, right? Sam, you've got a large family, and if, there a while ago, there was a big push to get rid of large SUVs and stuff. Well, those with big families, you're just struggling to keep food on the table with all the mouths to feed. And now when you can't have a vehicle that transports everybody, that multiple insurances and multiple cars and doesn't even work for you.
Yeah, right. And I think we want to have the latitude to make our choices, as many choices as possible, I guess. I think what's hard or one of the experiences I had when I first taught environmental science, I didn't know the ins and outs and the details of the science of a lot of the topics that I went into. I never took environmental science as a undergraduate or in high school or anything like that. Everything I learned about environmental science was kind of peripheral here or there, whatever.
Well, you probably got that merit badge, right?
I don't know, maybe. Right. The environmental science merit badge didn't cover all the details. But when I was anyway, I was assigned to teach this class, and so I'm reading the textbook and I'm really getting into the topic, and I'm learning these things for the first time and understanding them on a deeper level, and then turning around like teaching them. It's kind of funny that like in some instances I was really only a chapter ahead of the students, and I could have told them anything, right? They like you're the expert, right? But anyway, but it hit me that the things that I'm doing, that I'm consuming, have an impact on the world. Like it just had never, like it never hit me in a way that it did when I actually like learned about fossil fuel technology or solar panels or or the whole host of environmental topics. It's not all climate change, of course. There's water and clean air and all these things. And supply chains and everything. It all relates to our environment. Where when I took a hot shower, like it lost some of that wonderful warm effect. Like this hot water in its minuscule amount is, however, affecting somebody in the earth in a negative way, or some future person in a negative way. And I just felt kind of the gravity of like, well, I've got to make more of this as part of my life, and I can make changes here and there. I'd like to really make a difference, but then when you get into it, it's like such a complicated and big global issue. It can easily be, whatever sort of hope and emotion I felt in that moment can get squashed. So ultimately, doing what we can, doing our thoughtful actions towards whatever we can. Maybe it's not going to be enough, but we got to start somewhere.
I'm laughing a little bit at your shower analogy because, we recently remodeled our house, and when we go to buy fixtures, there's a lot of stuff that's not allowed to come into California because of its gallons per minute flow, so we have to buy shower heads and toilets and stuff that have a different standard than the rest of the country. So again, my choices are limited by the place that I live. But probably shouldn't say this publicly. Might have to have you redact it. But I went in and took that little restrictor out of the shower head that I put in my bathroom to the point where it peels my skin off. So I obviously am not feeling the same amount of guilt that you are. I've got good water flow, and my showers are well to my standards.
Yeah.
And funny. Illegal. Look at me, I'm an outlaw.
There you go. Well, what's also interesting though is that the issues are regional, right? Like, so California, even in a good year, is still in a drought, right? Virginia, we get tons of rain all the time, so it's like wasting water is not a thing. We have just tons of water everywhere. So don't think about, yellow, let it mellow, whatever. That doesn't apply here, but it does in California. It applies even more because California is such a wonderful place to live, right?
Because of water.
Right, because you're next to water, right?
Well, and it would just be a desert without all the water for the plants and stuff that grows here so well,
Yeah, right. Like all of our fruit and nuts and so much of what we eat comes from California.
But speaking on that, on just water, there was a time when you were in high school, and I came home and visited while I was in college, and mom and dad and the family was living in a place where water was really expensive.
Oh yeah.
And that changed habits. It was, if it's yellow, let it mellow till, multiple times until it goes brown, then you can flush it. And
with the laundry water excess, and
we were saving the laundry water. We were showering with the drain closed and collecting that and reusing it somewhere else. And so gray water was used. We didn't flush the toilet. You gathered gray water from either the laundry or the tub and used that to flush the toilet. And so you got twice the use out of water. And it had to do with price.
Yeah.
So scarcity is a big driver, but prices of, and I don't like seeing prices jacked up just for the sake of jacking up. I think the market should dictate what the market is. I don't like the government getting involved taxing things, gas or water or whatever, to the point where it's uncomfortable for consumption. But that was an example of a behavioral change, based on cost or scarcity of resource.
Yeah, I think the only problem with the market, at least with climate change, is that we kind of live in a bubble, right? And
Yeah,
so by
you
the time
don't pay the true cost.
right. Yeah, and with so many subsidies and other things going on, like nobody's really paying the true cost for anything. But even just as the earth warms, we have this warming inertia, right? So even if we ceased all CO2 consumption today, we would still see warming for the next, 30, 50, 80 years or whatever it is. I'm not sure what the thing is. And so if
Yeah,
we're waiting for the market to correct for climate change, it's going to be way too late. Like by the time we see the devastation of what climate change can do, like no market forces are going to be able to correct for that.
we have more control though than I think we give ourselves credit for. And I would like to see high tariffs on polluting countries, not just polluting countries, but for two reasons. One, not related to climate change, is unions and prevailing wage requirements drive costs up and ship jobs overseas. So I would like to see other countries forced to compete with American labor, wherever that's at, whether it's market driven or whether it's driven by unions. I would like it to be an equal playing field so that jobs stay here, or it's easier to promote jobs and not offshore them. But I think if we did a similar thing by charging polluting countries with a tariff of some sort or a tax, that would incentivize them to either clean up their act, or it would allow us to control the production of those goods here in a more, hopefully more clean or more sustainable way. It will drive the cost up, but I think in that case, I would be okay with paying more if it's implicated at the polluters, and not here, because I think right now we just do things that domestically hurt us.
Well, do you think a response to that might be that other countries tariff us, the United States, because for our pollution? Right.
It's their right. Yeah, I would think it's their right. But if there's a standard and everybody's held to a standard, right? Again, going back to you wanting your neighbors to be the same standard. If America's holding itself to a standard saying, if you don't produce goods at our standard, then we're going to tariff you for your pollution or whatever. I think that is one way to incentivize other countries, because we're the consumer, right? We're buying 90% of the goods coming out of these countries. And it forces us to be maybe a little bit responsible for what we're driving over there and what we're the demand that we're creating in their country for pollution.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if anything like that has, I mean, we kind of say we're doing that for the, other reasons like worker safety or, child labor, things like that. Where we're not going to accept, this merchandise if your factory is doing this to its workers. But I don't know if it, there are ways for private companies to skirt around that for, to shave costs or whatever it is. So I think there's a precedent there that maybe we could use for pollution.
I mean, there's tariffs on solar panels coming out of China. There's lots of workarounds for those. If you break down the solar panel far enough and then assemble it somewhere else, then you can claim it's, you can avoid those tariffs. Biden cracked down on those a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, and it created a big disruption in supply chain because people weren't willing to bring solar panels into the U.S. for a little bit because they didn't understand what he was going to be but what his administration was going to be penalizing for. So there was a lot of risk there because of all of the people that had skirted the rules. So I think there will always be that. I'm always looking for a loophole in the tax code that so I don't have to pay more taxes, right? As I'm sure you do, and everybody else who has bills to pay.
Right? Yeah. Trying to find the maximize your dollar in lots of different ways. All right. Well, I'm getting tired. 10:45 here, but
All right, I'm getting
thanks,
started.
Jon.
Good conversation. I think hopefully that'll be an interesting conversation for someone that wants to listen to it.
Yeah. I mean, I've got an hour and 15 minutes to
You
work
can
with,
probably trim some of that.
quite a bit. But yeah, thanks again, Jon.
All right, well, let me know when you want to do it again.
Okay.
Maybe we tweak the topic a little bit.
Yeah, and I don't know if I'll end every podcast like this, but love you, and
All right.
have a good night.
Love you too. Get some sleep.
See ya.